All right, I'm here with Mighty Peter. We are going to have another Mighty Peter Professor Latinx show. Awesome.
Ah, yeah.
So, Mighty Peter, I like one of the biggest things for me, puzzles in my brain, and I'm writing a book right now on teens, race, and comics, superhero comics in
Yes.
particular. Like how when you're in there in that writing space for a show like Mr. Iglesias, how, like, on the one hand you want it to be, you want to make sure you're representing the complexities of the mindset and the emotions of teens. You want it to appeal to them, you don't want to be condescending, but at the same time, there's adults in this show. How do you make that kind of move between the two, put yourself into the space of the teen, sort of like,
Mhm.
and make it interesting and fun for that audience, maybe even more than us.
Right, right. Oh, that's a great question. There's a lot of answers to that. And you kind of have to step back to like my first show, Greetings from Tucson, which is about me and my dad. And that show was what turned the heads of the Disney people to try to woo me to go do Wizards. And then, I've done a lot of primetime adults only shows. And so I would say that, one of the things that impacts me is I was this kid who, depending on who you talk to, was too smart for his own good, or, um, troublemaker, or whatever, but not challenged enough in scholastically, whatever you want to call it. And so I think whenever I approach that space, I think the first thing that always comes to mind is top of my intelligence. And that comes also from my improv training and from Del Close in Chicago, the idea of improvising every character at the top of their intelligence. So you're not really ever playing a dumb person. You might be playing somebody who's not as educated as the other person, but they're working as hard as they can to be as smart as they can. And I think that does a lot right away to the teen audience. It says that we respect you, that we think your problems are serious, and they matter, right? I think the other thing that's kind of fun about telling stories in that space is if you can remember back to when you were in that age range, syntax has changed, right? Lexicon has changed. Technology has changed. But what hasn't changed is that brain chemistry of being a person who's not a child yet, not a grown-up. And what I think that relates to in terms of storytelling is everything matters almost all the time. And so here's what I mean. Let's take an episode of Seinfeld, and let's take Kramer. And let's say that as a grown man with his own apartment, when Kramer comes across the way and says, that's it, I'm only ever wearing dress shoes. I got a deal on dress shoes and I'm only wearing dress shoes. And even when I work out. Part of what's making that a comical scenario is it's a grown-up, right? And we're laughing, if we laugh at all, we're laughing a little bit because we're like, it seems silly that he would be making that kind of pronouncement as a grown-up. But when you're in a high school mindset, I can go right back to high school where I was like, somebody said something to me about like, a members only jacket to date myself, and I was like, I'm going to wear this every day for March. That girl thought I looked cool in it every day. And then what's nice is, unlike the Seinfeld example where like Elaine and Jerry are making fun of Kramer, my friends were all like, can Marietta do it? Can he do 30 days? And there's this like feeling about it that it's very important to everybody. And so I just think the stakes are so high all the time. The angst of being a teen, and the test matters as much as the call from the girl. They all matter the same. So as a storyteller, it's really fun to break those stories because you're not worrying about stakes because they're there all the time. And so that's part of it. And another part of it is wanting to make sure that Another secret that Del Close taught me as an improviser was like, you want high status people, you know, doing low status things, and you want low status people doing high status things. So if you think about our show and you say, who's the smartest person in that universe? Marisol, the 16-year-old, is the smartest person. She's the one that's challenging the teacher. This is what we call ourselves now. She's the one that listens to the first part of his lesson and says, "Oh yeah, let me digest American history for you, right? You know, did some very, very bad stuff from the very beginning all the way to World War II. Pretty good stuff, and now we're going back down. Like she's got it." And so she's a person who's in low status in a power dynamic in that school, but the smartest one there, right? And I think Gabriel is the great flip side of that. He's a grown up who can act out whenever he wants, and he's charming, and you feel taken care of by him. I don't think we ever feel like he's not doing his job, but we also feel like he's the teacher that would go like, everybody outside, we're all going to get tacos, and like that's what we're doing. So I think it's that combo that really makes that work for that audience.
That's really cool. It actually helps me understand the show better and why it works so well, but also gives me a little bit of insight into the Saved by the Bell reboot that you and I both are watching. And
my boy Mari.
Yeah, I'm just like, I love this show, man. I do. I'm like,
now,
this
were you a fan of the original?
Now, I wasn't. I'll be honest. I wasn't.
Me too. I can honestly say I maybe only ever saw 2 episodes. It might be because of our age. We might have been just old enough to know that that felt like a cheesy after-school show, and we were not interested.
Totally, man. And I love this low status doing high status, and the kind of well, I guess, you know, Shakespeare was doing that, right?
For sure. Sure. Right. And by the way, I also just described, when I described Gabriel, like that is the medieval court jester, close to the king, says whatever he wants. Anybody else that's like any duke that comes up and says to the king the things the jester does, off of that guy's head, right? But the jester gets away with it.
Yeah, you're right, man. Totally. Before we jump into Saved by the Bell, was there an experience you had with Mr. Iglesias where you thought it, like you got everything right, the tone, the fleshing out of the character, and somehow when it made it to the screen, it just didn't work, it bombed or something? Any surprises, I guess?
Yeah, but surprises in the way of like a little bit of a creative letdown.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, well, there's two examples come to mind. One was we had this episode that was supposed to be about the Olympics. And it was a promo that Netflix wanted to do, and it was kind of like a one-off. It wasn't inside our narrative. And so all good intentions. And we were going to have a crossover with another Netflix show. And it ended up being, I remember the idea was we're gonna I think it was it started off as this. It was like it was about cheating, essentially. And it was about the uneven playing field. So it had a really noble idea of like the uneven playing field and sort of privilege. And then this idea that Gabriel was going to give them a demonstration of that by showing them, like there was a scene in the cafeteria. He was like, okay, we're going to run from this side of the cafeteria to this side of the cafeteria, but wait, you know, so-and-so gets to start here, and then you get to start here, and you get to start here. And they're like, wait a minute. He goes, yep, that's privilege, right? And then it backfires on him, and it turns one more time. And then it ends with this big wrestler called Big Show who shows up and like does some stuff. But it felt very on the floor, like linear, and it didn't feel like it had any twists to it. And I think that it was a letdown, and that was one of those ones, you know. Another one like it um, was we did this episode with it was the first season, the one I wrote about drinking, the sobriety one. And I'm really proud of that episode. I think that might have been our deepest emotional episode that season. And well, I really love the chemistry between Gabriel and the actress that played the person who was going to AA that he had feelings for. And they had some really good chemistry. I mean, not romantic chemistry, but chemistry as like human beings with each other and feeling like they were in the same universe. Well, she was interested in that episode, and we had an arc for her. But the next episode, she was kind of in it, but she had no story. She was this kid's mom, and we wanted her in a couple scenes just to keep her alive. And it just didn't work. Like, it was so interesting. Like, her, when we would say to people, this is the mom of this kid, it was great. But once we put her with the kid, it just didn't gel.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're like, oh no, what do we do? And so we ended up kind of not using her again and kind of letting go of that idea of his friendship with his parent. So it, you know, and it lets you down because you really have all these good intentions and you're like thinking that's all going to fire on all cylinders, but there's always those disappointments.
It is amazing to hear that kind of industry insight because, you know, from, you know, our side of the table as critics, as viewers, as, you know, people that are engaging with it on the screen, we don't realize like all the kind of intricacies of the kind of locking into place to create the magic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, magic is the right word because I think I had a person who was one of my bosses long ago, and you know, he considered himself to be like one of the best joke people in the business. And sometimes I would pitch like an off joke to him, not off, like not funny, but sort of sideways. And he was very old school. His constructions were very old school. And sometimes my joke would get in, and he would be a little, I don't want to say insecure, but during the week he'd be like, I don't know, that feels weird. Like, I don't really know. And then we'd get in front of the audience on Friday night, and my joke would score. And to his credit, I always remember he would say to me, he goes, this, he'd turn around to me after the audience laughs and he would go, all right, you were right. And he said, you know, this is why they'll never be able to replace us with machines, because there's a little bit of unknown magic that happens that you just can't count on.
Yeah. Yeah. All these people that, in fact, I even had colleagues that do this AI sort of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And,
yeah.
you know, it's like,
Nope.
watch this, the computer will finish your sentence. And I'm like, yeah, that might finish the sentence, but there's a long way to go between that finishing a sentence and, you know, doing a really cool movie or a TV show.
Yes, yes. There's a short film before you say Saved by the Bell. There's a short film that I show my short film class that was written all in AI like 2 years ago that they produced.
Oh,
I'll send you a link because it's great, because it's a mess. Doesn't make any sense, but they totally produced it with actors. So like it's people trying to make sense of this thing, and it's really good. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I want to see that for sure. Okay, Peter, let's talk about Saved by the Bell, which I was just, it knocked my socks off. And part of it, I'll be honest, is like the casting is just so good. It's like Mr. Iglesias, right? You've got these young people who are you put them in front of the camera, and you know, this Daisy Jimenez, played by, you know, Haskiri Vizazquez, is just like amazing, right?
You want to talk about the universes colliding? She is was an acting student of Julia Grob, who was a co-producer on Mr. Iglesias for 2 years with me, who I'm doing a show pitch with. And like, we were all in the writer's room when she flew out, because she's from New York. When she flew out for the audition, you know, Julia's on her phone in the room, like, how'd it go? And like, we were all like, oh my God. And, you know, and so it was great for me to then tell Mario, oh, you know that girl? Yeah, boom. Yeah, we know that girl. you know.
That's so cool. Well, they killed it
She's,
with that, man.
she's great. But so is that boy that in the pilot,
Devante,
that the
uh,
pilot, the boy that talks to Mario.
yeah, Devante. I don't know his. Yeah, I don't know his actor. The
I don't
actor's
know the
name.
actor's name, but he's really good.
And Alicia, what is it? Alicia Pascual Pena as Aisha. She, man, you know what? Okay. There was a moment in Saved by the Bell that was okay. So everybody, we've been talking about this, you and me and others, really. I mean, forever, but especially with the Black Lives Matter stuff, and how our communities really need to wake up to the fact that we have colorism in our own families, racism, all that stuff, especially toward, our African American and Afro Latinx brothers and sisters. And when this character Aisha, who it's I don't know 5-10 minutes into the first episode, I think we all assume she's African American, and then she busts out the Spanish, man, and it's like the magic moment.
Right? It's great. It's great. Just like it's great, like in the pilot. Don't they talk about gosh, isn't there like one line that says about the quote unquote blonde mean girl, this is a trans person.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the end of it. That is the total end of it for the
Yeah,
series.
I
It's
love
just,
that too.
I really love that.
Yeah, me too, because it doesn't it makes the point, but it doesn't belabor the point.
That's right.
Yeah, I love
That's
that. Lexi. And of course, I love that Lexi is a trans cheerleader, and the actor is Palestinian, Lebanese American. I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the timeouts. Okay, so you and I had talked really briefly about the original Saved by the Bell, and I'll be honest, the Zach character, never did it for me.
Right.
And like you said, maybe we were just a little bit too old. Um, but Daisy's timeouts, man, it's like I don't know if there is a show right now for teens that's pop culture that has the potential, two shows to have the potential to like decolonize and wake us up. It's your show, Mr. Iglesias, and it's Saved by the Bell. I'm
Yeah,
just,
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I'm very excited about both. And I will tell you this, I think that it's interesting because I don't think it's anymore, so I can actually talk about it. But I got an email not too long after we wrapped about, hey, Saved by the Bell needs help because they don't have upper level Latinx writers, right? They've got a nice diverse room and a nice gender balanced room, but they don't have that. I think they have like a lower level writer. And it was interesting because I was like, oh well, let me watch the episodes and blah blah blah. But I'm very busy, right? I'm got a lot going on and all that. And so, not to say that I turned them down, but it just was like, oh, that's interesting, but nothing came up. But I really hope that they do find that representation.
yeah.
Because I do think that show is doing great, but I would love for there to be even more. What is it like? I know what it's like to be the only one in the room, and I don't know for sure, but if I were to guess, I feel like the writer that is there would just love someone else to not have to always be the expert and just kind of like free them up, I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Well, so I'm glad you brought that up. So let's see where this goes. But my um I'm hoping I'm not right on this, but
Okay.
there is a level of writing, and it is great. There's great characterization, great writing. That moment when I think it's the second episode when they arrive, Daisy and Aisha and Devante arrive, and there's these very well-heeled white women who mean well, and they've got their little swag bags and the toothbrush and the pregnancy test,
Yes.
and then Ice-T's guide to making algebra your bitch.
Right, right.
So
Yes.
all that we get a great laugh, and of course there's like a lot for us to reflect on, and it's kind of, you know, decolonizing in certain ways, but we don't have much yet, at least from what I can tell, of real background, fleshing out of the character.
Not yet.
And so it'll be interesting to see if the writers are capable of that. And I think what you're getting at is there's a certain level of it's almost studied or academic, like we know we could plug this and shoot this out and we're going to get the laughs and you're going to get this effect, but do we have the heart yet?
Yeah, I don't know. And it's funny because I 100% agree with you. And I would say that I bow down to them in the way that they have the fast paced nature like that, for sure. And I do not know. I do not know what goes on in that room, but I know that like in our room, because our room is, you know, eight ninths diverse. Like it's all Latin writers, two white writers, and you know, I think we're 50-50 on the gender and African American and Indian American, and so even if it doesn't come out, and I'll give you a perfect example where it did come out. Like from the very first moment of the pilot, we always assumed from our back conversations in the room, we're like, Marisol, you know, probably brings in a lot of money to help her family out. She works after school, and you know, in the pilot, there's a reason why she's the smartest girl, but she's also being counseled out with these other sort of reprobate kids. You're like, well, what's her story? And so we give this monologue to Mr. Iglesias, like, I can't believe you're getting counseled out. And it's like, well, I'm late to every afternoon class because I work. And you're like, okay. And so that became, and there's been several tropey characters on TV in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm thinking of there was a half hour that was about a citizenship class that was about on NBC, I think, that starred one of the actors from Harold and Kumar.
Oh yeah, I don't know, I can't remember,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Anyway, and it had my friend Deanna Maria Riva in it, and she was playing like the immigrant who has 8 jobs, and like whenever they would go to a different set outside of class, like she'd pop up at the baseball stadium selling cokes, and it was a funny laugh, right? But it's tropey, right? We all have 7 jobs, and of course, what's hilarious about this trope, as the two of you, us having this conversation, and we both have probably 17 jobs between us. So like we are as guilty of the trope as anyone. But with Marisol, we were like, okay, so she brings a lot of money into the house. And why is that? Well, what's the situation at home? And then we decided we don't want her dad and mom, like we don't want to just go to single mom eventually. And so we had this big, rich conversation, which in the pilot, you didn't get any of that. But we knew going forward that like, okay, dad is somebody who comes in and out of the picture, and he's not always there. It's not been a great situation, which led us to very fertile territory in season 2 when we had Mexico's biggest comedian, Franco Escamilla, want to come guest star on his friend Gabriel's show. And he's a musician too, he does comic songs. And we're like, oh my God, Marisol's dad isn't around because he's a touring musician. Like, great, now we can plug this into that and make it resonant. And so we're wanting those backstories to feel very specific.
Yeah, and so that's what we'll have to see, you know.
Yeah.
But
but I want to ask you about something.
Yeah.
So with Saved by the Bell, and I am asking you, and please disagree with me if I'm wrong, because I've got a prejudged eyes on this. But when I watched the pilot, I was like, the original cast, they were pushing and performing in a way that was not unlike I remembered from watching the 1 or 2 episodes I saw of that show, right? And then along comes my pal Mario, and I've written for him twice now, about to be the third time. And I called him and I was like, I got to tell you, like, your performance, I don't know if it's because you've been working regularly this whole time, you've stepped into, a more contemporary acting style. I go, but I really feel like you really crossed over in such a great way. That scene with Devante, like, to me, the way he tossed off the line where when Devante's like, hey, I bet they don't even talk about, how you're Mexican. He's like, they don't, there's these little moments. And I felt
Mhm.
like his stuff with Elizabeth Burke, really, I just felt like he was really in his zone. And I was very impressed with it
Yeah, no, you're
compared
right.
to the other original actors.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, did he, did, it feels like he's finally relaxed into a space and a character that he can, it's almost like he can be himself, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
a little bit naive, but, fun and funny, but
Yeah.
really genuine. Yeah.
Yeah. Really earnest and like in a good way. And like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I think, I'm so far, loving it. Let's see if it finds heart. Mario seems to be carrying that, certainly.
For right
Um,
now, he's kind of carrying
yeah,
the heart there. Yeah.
yeah.
Which,
But
in a designed way, and you'd have to ask Tracy Wigfield, she created it, but it makes some sense, right? Because we have all these kids of color coming to the school, and then if the original team, like he's the person that is available to say, like, yeah, here we are, and he's kind of feeling that what he didn't really get from them back in the day, kind of that, and he's also kind of trying to help bridge them in the moment.
yeah, it might be that he is the other adult characters are kind of almost parodying themselves, their earlier versions. And he's actually the adult character who has grown into becoming an adult.
Adult, yeah. And the final note I'll say, and we'll go to the next thing you want to talk about, but um, you know, on the Globes on Sunday, Tina and Amy, they gave him a shout out, but it was in a joke that was about like, oh, and if you're watching TV or movies, how do you tell the difference? And they were doing a monologue about in the pandemic, how do you tell if it's a movie or a television show? And they had a lot of great jokes. But one of the jokes was, if Mario Lopez is in it and you're like, he's actually good, it's television, right? Not a movie. And so like it was a shout out to him, but I felt like it was a little shot. And so I texted my friend who is someone that I've known for years, and he knows all the parties involved. I wanted to keep his identity secret. But I was like, hey, I don't know if I appreciate that shot, right? And he was like, hey, you can't say that because that was just, any person in America who hosts stuff like Access Hollywood and then also acts is going to get a shot taken at him. That's just the nature of the game. It's not race. And I was like, I'm not saying it's race. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying that's my boy. And I felt like it was a little bit of a shot.
Hmm.
And then he came back and he's like, you know what? I get it. And I get that, my opinion has always been that he's been good for a long time. People just haven't wanted to acknowledge it. And so anyway, I tell him the story the next day. I'm like, hey, I stuck up for you. I texted so and so, who's a big important person in Hollywood, and he goes, we laughed when it happened. He goes, because he goes, this calendar year, he goes, I've gotten a shout out at the Globes, the Oscars, and the Emmys in the opening of all three. And I was like, oh my God, you're like the Tonys away from some weirdo like introduction EGOT situation, but it's too bad Broadway isn't around. Because I was like, we could call James Corden and say, just please, Mario's just one mention away from a sweep of this thing. And he thought that was hilarious.
let me ask. I know we're kind of going to be winding this down because,
Yeah,
well, you and I have like insanely busy schedules.
I
But
know.
when we mentioned a little earlier about this kind of really kind of affirming, even celebratory moment in Saved by the Bell, where we have a Dominican Latina
Yes.
cast to play, Aisha, one of the pals, and she busts out in Spanish, and it like radically shifts all of our sort of schemas, our racial schemas, our
Yes.
and so here we are in something like Oz Rodriguez's Vampires versus the
Yes.
Bronx, and
Yes.
I want to talk about that too because I love this one, and
So
I
good.
love I love that it's so teen centric and in a smart
Oh,
way and like fun at the same time. Um, but yeah, what's your like? Tell me what you're feeling with this one.
I was so taken with it, and I was it felt like one of those movies that's a piece of genius. Like the minute it started, I was like, oh my gosh, the gentrifiers are vampires. Like, have I seen that before? It was one of those moments that you see it and you go, this makes so much sense. I feel like I've seen 7 versions of it before. But then the more you think about it, you're like, I don't think I have. I do not think I have, right? And so that you're very blown away by that. Then when it becomes that it's clear that it's the point of view of these kids and like they're nerds and they're like with each other, and it just your heart sings, and it felt like there was legitimate danger, and the mixture of cultures, and it just felt very much like that world. I love the girl that was this sort of Greek chorus on her phone, and that felt really good. I love that she wandered into the shot at the penultimate moment. You know, it also had a real whether Oz meant it or not, I don't know. I met with him a week or so ago, but you know, there was a lot of Spike in there. And I love Spike. There was a lot with that, especially with that Greek chorus and those guys sitting in chairs and commenting. And there was a lot of elements that made it feel fable-esque in the way that Spike Lee does. So I really love that. And I also thought I was telling Oz too. I go, the details in there,
Mm.
and it's just very throwaway stuff. And it's not even cultural details. I said it's like taking care of story details. I said I love that when they were finding stakes, they needed to find stakes. I was like, it was such a great quick shot that you saw them pulling apart some stuff to get stakes, and then you cut to those 2 guys. My friend Vlad's one of them, who's like, they were the guys sitting on those chairs. They're like, what happened to our chairs? And you're like, oh my God, that detail is so good and rich. And it just says such a sense of care about it that I just really adored it. And it also had that feeling too of actors you've not seen before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's another great example of spec drilling down the specificity of detail in the story, then resonating out beyond the story, like what you were just talking about, like all that really, I mean, good storytelling, and this better than anybody, is like, going down, like, getting that specificity, and by doing that, like, boom, it blows out, where
Yeah,
everybody can relate.
yeah.
um and I love that, the Blade, reference, and
Oh my
it's
God, the Blade reference was great. And then again, the nerds, like walking the day, like, hey, we're day walkers, and the other one like, that's dumb. And by the way, I told Oz this too. My favorite moment in the whole movie, is when they tell the girl, the pretty girl, and then they're waiting to see how she'll react, and her comment is like, my grandma's Haitian. She raised me to be ready for this shit. Like, so you're like, oh my God, it's so great. Cause I was like, that's such a picture in a window on, like, that world in such an economical way that feels right.
You know, there's another movie that it brought to mind. I don't know if you saw Joe Cornish's film Attack the Block, where John Boyega got his kind of
Yeah, yeah,
his moment, but where the, we're again like, we're in a really specific space, a lot of detail. It's kids, teens that are like, we know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to survive. We got aliens dropping from the sky, and we're just going to take care of business.
that's right.
Um,
But see,
and
and that's a great way to kind of round off our conversation. But I was going to say to you, like, that comes all the way back to the stakes are even when you're in that age group. Like
yeah,
getting my homework done, being able to go to the concert on Friday, and then taking down the aliens that are going to destroy our bodega. They're kind of all even,
yeah, yeah,
right? And that's what makes that world wonderful, because you're like, yeah, they got to get it done. Now, why do they have to get it done? Well, it's not because they're saving humanity. It's because they have some other thing they've got to get to do.
I love it. Awesome, mighty Peter, super inspirational. And with that,
Let's do it. Let's do another one soon.
okay, take care,
Let's
man.
make that our rally cry. Let's do another one soon. Um,